don't have that or kind of been morally injured in that component, there's a part that, you look for someone, you're still looking for that community, that person that can give you hope, that inspiration, the one that can actually normalize the situation. Like you're not the only, not that you're not the only one, because your story is unique, but there are stories of overcoming what you've been through.
Any of my brothers that are out there, struggling with their deployment or, life in general, I tell them that, hey, to stay strong and to keep holding on and to understand, you're here for a reason and that, your life and what you're doing does have purpose. Hey everyone, this is Greg Washington and I have with me today Alton. We want to welcome you to our next episode of Guards Down. Alton, how's it going?
It's going well, man. I appreciate the invite. I'm excited about just talking a little bit about my story and kind of what I'm doing now. So I'm excited to be with you, Greg. How are you, man?
Indeed, man. I'm doing well as can be. My daughter, she just graduated from high school, so
nice.
She got me pretty excited about that.
Congratulations.
With everything that was going on, these last couple of months, I know that for like all high school students and athletes, they've been trying to figure out, what their future is going to be. Yeah. So, to finish out high school, her senior year, and then, her plans on going to college, like, that kind of all got tossed in the air. So yeah, I'm just excited, we're taking it one step at a time.
That's awesome, man.
But yeah, but before we get in, tell us about yourself.
Okay, so I'm originally I was born in North Carolina, man, but was pretty much raised in Maryland. So I went to middle school, high school in Maryland, and then went to the military academy. That's kind of where we met. I played football up there, did track and field, commissioned as a field artillery officer, and did time, in the military about 11 years. Deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, had those experiences, medically retired out the Army about after 11 years, stayed in my general area, but started doing mental health work, counseling, and then also did some ministry in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes following the military. And now just have opened up a clinical mental health counseling center that has offices in Belton, Texas, and also in Georgetown. Focus has really been on leaders, right? I noticed that when I was in the military, and then after, how we as leaders have a lot of emotion that we have to deal with while making right and ethical and great decisions. So wanted to work there, and so that introduced me to a lot of trauma work. So it's kind of where I've been.
Got you. Okay. Well, before we deep dive into it, I just wanted to ask the question of, and I ask everyone this because it's part of, what we're doing, right? When it comes to trauma and grief and the tools and techniques that you learn to deal with it. So the first question I want to ask you is, growing up, did your parents or, someone around you teach you the tools and techniques to learn how to deal with grief and trauma?
So for me and my family, it was really about faith. The Christian faith was one of the things that kind of helped us, see the lens of suffering and struggle, right? You can see that throughout the Bible. So that was, preached in my household, but nothing really particularly about dealing with just trauma, right? So, we have those type of things that we're kind of identifying now. The main thing was you can't let it beat you. You can't let it, cause you to quit. All the things that we probably all had, right? The things that kind of drove us to play Division I football and other things, right? Hey, you just got to do it. You got to face the adversity and go through it. So that's kind of what we work through. And then the spiritual side, make sure that, we're looking to a higher power. We're looking to God. And then also knowing that human humble side, right? That we're not all knowing and all those type of things. So those are the things that kind of inform me. it wasn't like deep diving like we do nowadays, man, about what you're feeling and, the emotions behind it.
Got you. Got you.
Mm.
That makes sense. So with having a religious background, or at least having the support that comes with religion,
Mm.
i.e., going to church and being around like-minded people, learning about and acknowledging that you have a higher power than you, that you can turn to, right, for hope, for faith, um, and also for, um, I guess, like a learning or teaching of love.
Mm-hmm.
And then hearing, words of inspiration and encouragement through that channel. I had a young lady on one of my episodes recently, and she was sexually abused by someone in her church community.
Uh-huh.
And so at a very early age, that completely turned her off from church.
Yeah.
And so she had to find her support in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself is difficult because, when someone goes through something like that and it's from a community that you think you can trust, you sever those ties. And so, how do people find help outside of religion?
Yeah. I definitely, one thing I definitely, my heart goes out to her and people like her that have been hurt by communities, where you're supposed to find the help and connection and hope. But that's one of the things that we're looking at now, right? Within the clinical side is that religious and that spiritual struggle, right? The moral injury, all those type of things that are coming up and causing us to leave the places where we're supposed to find hope or is known for hope. For me, kind of from that biblical standpoint, I could identify with Christ more than I could identify with those leaders that are around me. Right. So it was more of a spiritual thing, right? I could identify with Jesus where he's saying like, I can identify with you. I bore everything upon the cross. So it was more of a relationship and learning those type of things. But those that don't have that or kind of been morally injured in that component, there's a part that, you look for someone, you're still looking for that community, that person that can give you hope, that inspiration, the one that can actually normalize the situation. Like you're not the only, not that you're not the only one because your story is unique, but there are stories of overcoming what you've been through. Right. So connecting to, counselors, connecting to those that do coaching, those that do, just community trauma work. There's people that are reaching out, and it's more prevalent now than we've had before, right? In any other communities. So being able to find those people in your community, you can do it also through volunteerism, right? I think we're seeing that with the veteran population, where you actually connecting to a volunteer organization and you're getting yourself help while you're helping others. That sense of community is very valuable and important.
What made you want to help? What made you go into this field? I mean, you came from West Point.
Yeah.
You were a high-speed officer in field artillery, and you had a strong family background. So why go into the mental health field?
Yeah, so my parents are always of the mindset, man, to help, right? That's kind of what they taught us. Just generationally going back, my family, on my father's side, were, the type that had a farm and they would hire the local community, the other African Americans. And then the next generation, my dad's generation, they all went off to school, right, to get educated. So part of what, was always taught to us is even though you may go and get these individual things like getting education, you always have to take care of your community. So for me, it wasn't just about the mental health thing. It was how can I be most effective? One thing that I learned in the military was that, the very first time I went to Iraq, man, it was totally different than the other times, right? And other places after. So I was there at 2.5, right? So, how we dealt with trauma and conflict, some of our service members dying or getting injured. It was like, hey, wash out the vehicles, get refitted, it's time to go back out there, right? It wasn't a refitting time. It wasn't the same thing, man. We had some downtime, but, you had to be mentally prepared to go right back out there and continue to fight. So it was a difference. And the thing that I enjoyed the most out of all my military time was actually just the counseling side, right? Where we were talking with the younger soldiers, others that are trying to figure out what they want to do in life, how to get all their resources together. So that's kind of where I got it from. And kind of fell in love with that. So wanted the tools to present it. And I work with justice involved veterans as one of my first things after getting licensed. So I would go into the state and county jails and work with those that, experienced trauma overseas and then came back and they didn't have really useful coping skills. So they would go turn to drugs or violence and all the other things that, we as a society know now hey, they need other help than just putting them in jail. So, that kind of stemmed from there, man. I've been working in that field and with young men in particular since then.
Got you. Okay. So just to recap, and I'm just going to hit, a couple of points because this is kind of leading into a direction. So you bring up moral injury,
Mm-hmm.
you bring up community, you bring up things that have been passed down from generation to generation, and you bring up, individually, this wanting to help and serve others, right? And so we take the climate that we're in today, where, you have George Floyd, who was just killed or murdered by a cop, or I don't know what the technical or correct, way would be it. But you have this uprising of people that are angry, that want justice. And so let's start talking about generational trauma, right? And what it is, if you can define it, and, how is it passed down from generation to generation?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's the story that we're trying to uncover now, right? It's, a lot of it's being passed down through the stories that we hear and recounted to us through generations. But additionally, how the responses to circumstances and things that we see, right? We learn through experience, and then we also learn through, things that we read and hear and all those type of things. So that's kind of how it's being translated. So if I, some of the things that my father and my grandfather went through, uncles and all those type of things, I would hear those stories as a young man, right? And it would be, cautionary tales. Hey, don't do this. Don't be very, flamboyant out there, wild, very loud and boisterous, all those type of things. So you can get through life a little easier. So you won't be pointed out, spotted, those type of things, right? So it's in the manner in which we talk to, like telling our children, hey, you don't want to be this. These are the stories of young black men or young black women that have met peril or met trouble because they were being to this or to that, right? So we're hearing these generational things that have been passed down to us as if we're not good enough just being who we are, right? So that leads to some self-loathing, self-hatred, wishing that we were someone else, looked a little different, acted a little different, come from different statuses. So we see in that more now, right? So we can identify with it across races because we have these videotape murders and other things that have happened. So we can see it. We can see that it's not just something that was a story. So you hear the stories. I hear the stories of past generations, and I see what's happening currently in my generation. And it feels as if the walls have closed in. It's here, it's imminent, the danger is present to me, right? So it's a mix of some of the post-traumatic stress, right? We can call it right down the line and say, it's right there, right? The requirements, all the criteria for post-traumatic stress, they're happening, and it feels like it's happening within our generation, just from these racial injustices and things like that. So, as we look at it, that's the thing that we have to deal with. So, when we look at stress, right, anything that has to do with post-traumatic stress, it happens to the body. right? It not only happens to the mind and psychology of the mind, right? It also happens to our body. So anything that deals with stress, it deals with the central nervous system, it deals with the autoimmune system, and it also deals with the endocrine system, right? So you have, diseases like diabetes. You have all these other things that are now being prevalent in our community because generationally, from a young age, we are told so many different things about this could happen to you. This could happen to you, right? Be aware. Be aware. Don't be caught in these type of situations. Be aware. So you're create. There's been a creation of anxiety that you're never safe, right? You're never okay just to be relaxed and chill. You have to be on guard as a young African American, right? So all those type of things, and it rests in our nervous system, in our brain, and the nerve endings and bundles and all that stuff, man. And we have never really talked about that as a people. How do we make sure that we are safe, but also how that thing that's messing. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes complete sense. It does, and it brings up the question of which is twofold, right? So, the moral injury that we are feeling and witnessing and seeing. So, the lessons that we were taught from our past generations, or stories that we were told, are now being confirmed with what's happening in society right now.
Yes.
And the point that you bring up that I wanted to ask is, the stories that we were told, don't be too flashy, don't be this, right? To me, it kind of feels like you essentially put a ceiling on a person's greatness, right? Yeah. So you can't be this because of who you are, or, you have to stay under the radar, or you can't excel, is one thing. And then the other part of it is that the coping mechanism that our generation has learned, right, to survive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it has, man. I think that's part of it, right? Like, when you think about any of those things that are dealing with the stress, right? What do you do to deaden your body? How do you deaden your senses, your mind, your thoughts, and your body to this feeling of alarm in your system, right? Like if you think about, the amygdala and all those things within our brain, there's a fight or flight, right? It's always registering a threat. So if we've done that throughout our lives, I'm Junior, right, into my family, Junior, right? So, hey, Junior, you need to always be aware, right? You need to always be aware. You need to know what's around in your surroundings, right? So we're translating. All right, I got to always have my head on the swivel. I got to know what I'm saying, what I'm feeling, what people are doing around me, right? So we have all these things, and if we're trying to deaden those things, that's when we begin to say, okay, apathy comes in, right? Disenfranchisement, all those type of things begin to cause us, right? So, hey, I won't strive as high. If I get into this place where I'm just like, and I had to deal with it with me, right? Let me just get into this place where me and my family are just okay, right? I can provide that social economic place and status where, hey, let me just get there and I can be okay in the suburb or right. I can just do it and that'll be fine. It will change the circumstance. But I no matter what, there is that systematic, right? That systematic thing, and it kind of permeates our society. So even in a suburb, you can feel it. Even in the heart of the city, you'll feel it, right? In institutions, you'll feel it, right? And some of it is the actual thing that is happening to us, but it's also what we have been experiencing, right? So if we look at trauma, we have this internal thing that says, hey, there's something that's wrong. There's something that's off, right? If you look at it through post-traumatic stress lens, there's always something that's going to be alarming. That there right there is different, or there's a potential for danger here, right? So it's a combination of our environment and then also what we also are carrying inside. So it's important to deal with the systematic injustices, but also with us, man, right? If we, it's just like, when we go to war, like, that whole area is full of things that could potentially lead to trauma. but we come back home and we're safe in the streets of them, safe in the streets of America, right? But we feel like if we hear a bang or we hear someone coming up behind us, all these different things, we feel like, oh man, it's happening again. It's happening again. So we're in that circle, man, right? That loop. And we have to break that loop two ways: internally, how we deal with ourselves and that physiology in our body, and then also how we're making it aware amongst our community and other races and in our race.
Right. So it's two things we're dealing with, right? Your individual trauma that you personally go through, and the generational trauma that that surrounds you, right? That you grow up in. What are some ways people can help themselves?
Mm-hmm. So,
right? Individually and also in community.
Yeah, man. So, I know it's difficult during this time, man. And, I've had many discussions with, those of us in the African-American community and other races, right? Sometimes, if we think of stress, we try to make our world small, right? Like if I'm trying to look at someone that has post-traumatic stress, or even if we look at post-traumatic, slave syndrome or any of those type of things, we try to make our world as small and as controllable as possible, right? So we narrow our friends, we narrow those who we really trust, who we see, we safeguard certain areas and different things in our lives. So in that process, we're saying that we can control everything, control the environment. But in order to come out of that, and part of that, what we do in counseling and trauma work is how do you live? And like I told you, I'm a Christian, man. One of the things that I had to take to heart, man, dealing with my own post-traumatic stress was Christ said, I came to give you life and give it to you more abundantly. And that, for me is, man, the way I was living after I got injured in combat and dealing with post-traumatic stress, my life was about this small, man. I talked to my wife, I talked to my son, I maybe talked to my mom, right? Because I was like, man, everybody else is kind of unsafe. But as we begin to deal with that trauma, we open up the circles, we talk a little bit more. We actually share what's going on, right? That awareness piece first is very important. And I'm actually dealing with fear. I'm dealing with the sadness and even sorrow, man. Like you talk about grief a lot, man. That emotion of sorrow, we don't really actually have a way to talk about that in our community, right? We haven't in the past. Like how all the generational trauma of the sorrow that it causes to a people, right? It just sits in your heart, it sits in your spirit, it sits in your mind, man. It sits in everything that you do. You can be happy and go forward, but you have a deep sorrow, right? So how do we deal with that? So being able to aware of that trauma, aware of what you're feeling, those emotions, and finding a community that can talk to you about it. And it's important that we're not talking just to ourselves, amongst ourselves. We're also talking to our community at large. Many Caucasian, many, Hispanic, Mexican, just all different races within my network I have spoken to, and they identify with the trauma or they give me a vantage point that I didn't see, right? So it helps us make our community full. And, one thing that I kind of point out to those that I work with too is, some of the skills that we've had, like as veterans going downrange, when are you actually the safest, right? We were never the safest in my combat experience. We were never the safest when we were actually sitting on our bases, right?
Yeah.
We weren't the safest because we didn't engage anybody. We didn't know what was going on in the city. We couldn't even tell the differences, right? And the only time that we really were the safest is when we were out amongst the population. And once we did that, we could actually see the differences. We can interact. We can see the different people, the threats, and all that stuff clearly, instead of what we thought or through just our intelligence, right? So it's just kind of like the same, man. If we go into our silo is just that's kind of what we've done after the big civil rights movement, right? We kind of went into some silos, and we weren't involved in every aspect of our society, and kind of getting out there and moving around and talking through everyone. And I know I'll keep on going different places, man. You just get me excited. So
no, look, no, this is great. You were talking and you brought me back to to a point in my military experience. I remember when I was on my second deployment, and me and the XO for, for our battalion, we were going to meet with one of the local leaders. And so, you know, they've already established this relationship with them. So we were good. But this was my first time, being there. So going in, the XO, he wanted to take his gear off and, sit down and stuff. And here I am. I'm at the ready. Like, I don't know these motherfuckers. Like, I'm not about to chill because, this isn't my environment. This isn't I don't feel safe. So I definitely connected on you when you talked about, that the community experience, right? And that whole nine. So I really appreciate that insight. Man, keep going. Like this is
yeah, man. Just the things that we've kind of been through, man, and how we can kind of make it better, right? Sometimes like in situations like this, we feel like we have not made any progress whatsoever. Right. And the killings and things that happen, man, it's like, man, we ain't did nothing. We're still so far away. But it's also just like, we think about war is the enemy always has an option, and they have retaliation, all those type of things. Right. And I'm not saying this is a war like that, but we learn as soldiers that, man, there's some unfortunate outcomes. I work with a lot of physicians, right, in my practice, and unfortunately, they can do all they can, man, in surgery and all that stuff, but there's always unfortunate outcomes that happen. And it feels like, man, so I've heard many of them say, man, I'm a terrible doctor or whatever, right? But you gave this person a chance to live, right? Those type of things, right? How do you deal with that side, that duality, right? And I was thinking about this earlier this week, man. We have to live with that duality, and that's sometimes the hardest part, right? If we don't have that, we no longer have that mental flexibility to actually deal with the duality of our society. That's when we really begin to self-corrupt and, make some, hard things. We can know that there's some progress, but there's still a lot of work to go.
Yeah.
Right. We know that there's some justices that are happening, but there's many injustices that aren't happening. Right. So we have to understand that. Right. So as we're walking through it is understanding those things. So there's some things that we started on a long time ago. Right. And I had to remind myself this week, because I work as a chaplain with the police department. Right. So I had to make sure I deal with my emotions. I felt right. I talked to people that I need. I had to cry. I had to pray. I had to worship. I had to do all those type of things to make sure that I'm okay, so that I can actually be that duality within talking to the police force, talking to my family, talking to my community, and all those type of things. So if we find ourselves where we can't see a little bit of both sides, or have that compassion, then it's time to just talk to someone. It's not a sign of weakness.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And that's, I think that's the big part too. Like we look at it and say, no, and we don't have that flexibility to say, yeah, this is bad. This is terribly, terribly bad, but this is also happening. So I need to keep on the work. Cause I told you, I felt that this week, like, man, I haven't done nothing. I volunteer. I do all these other things, man, it don't mean nothing. I just need to give it up. Right. So then we would just go back into the silo, and we cannot afford that at all. We have to say, no, man, I know that hurts. We process as a community. We process as brothers like you and I and others, man, just process and then say, okay, what can we do? Continue the mission. Like we continue the mission. Like you stay in the police department, with the police department. You stay in the community. You stay involved in finances, man, training the next generation, all those type of things, man, even though our heart is hurt. But we have to talk about the sorrow. Like if we don't talk about it, then it becomes embedded in our conversation. In a maladaptive way. Hey, we talked about the post-traumatic slavery syndrome and all those type of things where we embedded in our conversation, oh, we're going to beat down our kids or say things that keep them from getting too haughty, right? We're going to make sure they stay in their place. So anybody in society won't have to do it. I'll do it. But you're supposed to be the most secure and loving and strengthening person, but we're the one that's actually adding the hurt. So we have to deal with those things, right? So we have to talk through them and make sure that we're aware, and we come to one another, man. I think the one thing I value the most, man, is community. Like I knew after I dealt with many things at war and after that life, man, I needed someone that could always yank my chain.
Hey guys, it's Jerome. Greg and I wanted to invite you to the community that we created for the whole Guards Down family. Jump on Facebook or check the show notes for the Guards Down Facebook group. There you'll be able to find a community of folks who are committed to raising awareness about complex grief and PTSD. Look forward to chatting with you guys in the group. Now let's get back to the episode.
That I respected, right? Like my wife is one, but others, man, like my other brothers, Brandon Dickens, Paul Henderson, Dirk Devane, Lawrence Lewis. Those are the guys, man, they can yank my chain, right? And I have other people outside that circle of military and West Point guys that can yank my chain. I need those people in the faith community. I have people that say, hey, what's going on, man? What's going on? And if we're by ourselves, man, no one can see those things. And it causes us to be isolated, and we start spinning and spiraling down.
Got you. Two parts. The first one was when you were talking about being able to go out and help volunteer for the police force in your community. You were saying, you were having to get yourself right to help them. One thing that, came to mind was you also got to be able to talk to yourself, right? You got to motivate yourself. You got to love yourself. I know I tell my daughters, every day, hey, look, when you wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I love you. You should be saying, I love you more than you say, I love you to someone else. Right?
Yeah.
And
sure.
so, you definitely have to be able to renew yourself in order to help others is one of the hardest lessons that I learned, but I'm glad I learned it. And, when you were speaking, that came out. The other part is community, right? Finding people that will give you the type of support and love you need so that, you can make it, and making sure that one is positive, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because you that old saying, you are who you hang around.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So finding people that love you and support you and help build you up versus, people that break you down. The second part, one thing that I wanted to go into, or can we back up, is let's talk about moral injury, because you brought that up earlier. And so to define it, to understand what it is and how we overcome it.
Okay. So let me talk about the portion about the self-compassion. Like you talking about, man, saying we love ourselves, man. That is valuable, man, whenever you're dealing with post-traumatic stress, in all its forms, right? Like stress, any of the stress syndromes. If we don't have self-compassion to say, like, hey, man, I don't know why I'm sweating, man. Why am I nervous? Why am I feeling jittery? Or why am I feeling low today? Like all those different things. If you don't have self-compassion, then one, lack of a better word, you're mean to yourself, right? You start saying, man, you're weak. Man, you shouldn't, that type of stuff, man. You think about this, man. Like especially in post-traumatic stress, we'll face certain things. Those who have been to war, right? You face certain things, and it's the sign of bravery that you're willing to go fight and engage with the enemy, right? And then you come home and a noise, man, just makes you lose your mind. It's like it feels like you lost. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It triggers, and you like, man, you crazy. Man, why are you acting so crazy? Like the things that we will say in our mind, you're acting crazy. You're acting like you lost your mind. Like all these different things. And if we don't give ourselves compassion and understand what our body is actually responding to, right? Like, what our body is responding to, then we're gonna criticize ourselves. We're gonna try to lock it down until it begins just to overflow, man. It seeps out of all these closets and stuff like that, right? So that's a great point, man, that you mentioned, that self-compassion, and that's the one thing we got to learn. How'd you learn it, Greg?
Man, I learned it the hard way. I was just getting out of the military. I had spent my whole, teenage years, college years, training to be an officer in the Army, and that's all I wanted. And so to now be hurt and Uncle Sam saying, well, we're going to send you to the house.
Yeah.
For me, it was, okay, well, what do I do now? So having to start over in life, I was going through a divorce at the time, or at least the start of it. And also my mom, she was diagnosed with cancer. It weighed heavy on me. I felt like such a failure.
Yeah.
And it was to the point where, I had thoughts of suicide. And I couldn't even fathom how I was going to make it, what the future looked like. And just with all the self-doubt and all the guilt that I put on myself, I felt people would have been better off without me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until my little cousin called me on the day I was actually going to commit suicide, and she just asked me to come hang out.
Wow.
She just called and checked on me on the out the blue.
Wow.
And hey, cousin Greg, it was, hey, sweetheart, what's going on?
Yeah.
Oh, nothing. Me and mommy, we ain't got no money, so we're gonna go window shopping at Walmart. You want to come with us?
Wow.
All right. And I went. And then later that week, she asked me to go to church with her.
Wow.
I went to church. And it's not that I'm not religious or that I don't believe in God, because I do, right? Because the military teaches you, you have to be neutral, right? And not and not share your political and religious opinions, when dealing with things, or just to the outside world, because what you have to show as a leader. And so, like, for me, it was hard to be in church, because I remember on another one of my deployments where here I am looking at this Muslim man, probably 5 to 10 years older than I am, and I'm having to practice religious tolerance as a ambassador for the U.S., being an officer in the Army, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like, well, who am I to tell him he's wrong for his beliefs in his belief systems and what he grew up in? And so the practicing of religious tolerance kind of taught me to just universally acknowledge that there is a higher power out there greater than me, that I don't know what people call them, whether it's Jesus, God, Allah, Buddha, all of these different religions. I just know there's something greater than myself. And so sitting in church, that's when I started to acknowledge that there is something greater than me, and that I needed to do better. I wanted to do better. I didn't want to miss out on life anymore, because I had been numb to the point where I couldn't feel anything. And I couldn't, right? Like I could put my hand on the stove and I wouldn't feel nothing, or I'll get cut and I couldn't feel nothing. And so the way I was physically feeling, my body and how it was responding or not responding, that was the same way I was on the inside. Yeah, and so that numbness was so numb that, hell, I just didn't want to be numb anymore. Yeah. And so it was either lights out or turn the light on and let's go find happiness. And so that pursuit of happiness has been like the saving grace. And it all sparked from someone showing just a little bit of compassion and care to check in. So that's where I learned it, and it grew from there.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So that resonates with me, man. That, but many other veterans, it resonates, man. Like, I was saying about living life abundant, man. Like, we could have all these different things, and then our life is like so small. It's, we stunt, part of the stress, man, it stunts us from going too high or going too low, right? So we try to stay here, middle of the road. Nothing really affects me. I'm shutting down everything and I'm going straight. Man, and that life is, think about that, man, as a father, right? Your kid comes, like, and these things happen to me. Like, kid come up to me and give me and tell me something that really makes them joyful, and I'm just middle of the road, right? That's a disappointment. That's a rejection for my kid. All those things, man. And that all that coming together, it kind of, it makes you say, man, I got to change. Like, this has to stop, right? One of my mantras, man, my mantra became at a point, man, when I was dealing with it. And for me, post-traumatic stress, I could sit in a dark room and be perfectly fine. I don't know how many times my wife would come in the house or where we're living and she, flip on the light and I'm just sitting there in the dark, nothing on, nothing, right? I could be in my world, right? Mm-hmm. And, having to say, man, at all costs, I need to be free, right? And that's kind of like, for me, that's how I live now, man. Like, at all costs, I have to be free, man. I can't be in the prison that was once my mind, right? I can't be in that place where everything that I'm sensing in the world telling me that I have to be this way or that way, or, be very protective. So, it's the thing that I do, and it's not a violent thing toward anybody. No, it's at me at all costs. I'm gonna be free. I'm gonna walk in love. I'm gonna be joy. I'm gonna have joy and all those type of things, man. So the first thing that started coming back for me was joy, right? Like, I had to learn how to experience joy again, right? Mm-hmm. So, man, that's big. That's definitely big. But as you were talking, man, so I'm in a doctoral program at Johns Hopkins working on really some of the moral injury side of things. But my specific problem is spiritual pain and well-being in the warrior culture, right? So that warrior culture I kind of loosely defined as military, veterans, and then also first responder communities, and how spiritual pain, which we can say, as components of it, is the moral injury, the spiritual or religious struggles or distress, all those types of things that build to a pain within us, right? And if we look at the body, the neurological body, the same pathways that deal with physical pain, they're the same pathways that run along in your body that send you signals of emotional, spiritual, social pain, all those type of pains, man. It kind of runs the same thing. So it's affecting the body the same way. And, with spiritual pain or the moral injury type of thing, it's kind of like the sacredness of life. If that has kind of we've lost that value, we lost that importance, then there's a potential, like in different models, like Joyner's model of suicide and all those type of things. It says you kind of acquire the capability now to commit suicide or do a different type of act, right? A violent, self-violent or a different violent act. So moral injury, it's like and I don't want to go just clinical, man. I just want to talk in layman terms. Right? Yeah. But I can refer people to, like, if you just type it in moral injury, and one really good definition is through the VA. The VA PTSD, National Center for PTSD. One of my good friends, she kind of explains it, but it's something that you feel, you witness, or you've seen, or you heard of, or an event that happened that you or someone else failed to act in consistent manner with your morals or your religious beliefs, or that kind of component. And what the end of it causes guilt, shame, and those are the things that kind of come out that they're underlining, where there's a strong sense of guilt and shame, and those emotions, guilt and shame, are emotions that, if not dealt with, they continue to cause us to spiral downward, right? Guilt is something that I'll forever have to receive penance for, or I always have to pay for this. I can't really even, we talk about, in religious settings where I can never be connected to God because I have this thing that I've done, or I witnessed, or I allowed, or whatever, that says I'm always guilty. I'm stained. I'm always put to the side. And there's that shame portion. That shame, man, and you look through the research, there's not much goodness that ever comes out of shame, right? like someone receiving shame, because it's internal, it's assigned to a person, and it's not like a characterological thing. It's just I have shame and it's me, right? So I did something bad, or I allowed something bad to happen, and then when you have those things, and we see this in our communities, we see moral injury quite often, right? And especially from war, but other places where, hey, this happened where in this faith community where it shouldn't happen, right? That's the place where it should be safe. It should be okay. But then it goes against what our religious beliefs are, or my moral conviction. So it leaves us in a place where it's mental health, but it's also spiritual health, right? That spiritual pain that is kind of caused from it. So it leaves like, forever like a feeling of there's something that I can never get back. Right. So, in our physical bodies, we can have an injury in our shoulder. Someone touches it, I move it a certain way, I'm going to feel that pain. And it's the same way in the pain, like in moral injury and other places, like emotional pain, where if it rubs up along against morality, it rubs up against religious or spiritual concerns, I have a pain because this thing that has happened. Does that make sense? I'm trying to get out my clinical language, man.
No, that makes absolute sense. It does. I just wanted to go back and we actually talk about moral injury because that's one of the newer terms I've just learned. Just understanding the mental health world and how people see it. So my thing has always been, you might not know what you're going through, but if you can research it and you can start to define it and identify it, then you can put together a game plan on how to overcome it. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. Okay, big question. Especially when it comes to people that are depressed and thoughts of suicide, right? Does one have to go through that dark space or get to that threshold or hitting rock bottom in order to start to seek help?
Absolutely. So you talk to a counselor, so absolutely not. No, you don't have to hit that dark spot. But unfortunately, that's usually when people come in, or they're getting to a place where someone is now forcing them, hey, you need to make some changes, right? And when we look at our community sometimes are not quick to identify some of the things that kind of are precipitating or leading to some of that suicidality, right? So there's a lot of research going on to learn more about suicide ideations. That's the thoughts and, your ruminations, suicide behavior, like cutting, the way we talk, or the risky behaviors. And then you also have the serious, suicide attempts, right? Pills, doing excessive, whatever the choices. So you have all these type of things. And a lot of times if we're not, and especially if we're not in community with anyone, sometimes we ourselves aren't going to go look for help. But if we're not in community with anyone else, no one else can say, hey, you need that. You need someone to talk to. Let's go and bring you to this place. Like, your story, my story. Someone said, okay, come on, man. Come on. Right. Someone else had that compassion on us and brought us in, so some signs that, and I kind of subscribe to that, like I was saying, that Joyner theory of interpersonal theory and psychology of suicidality. And it's like threefold, three things that kind of really have to happen. And like the first is that there has to be a feeling of that I don't belong anywhere. Mm-hmm. Right. Like, I have no place. There's no one that can identify with me. I feel different than everybody. I look different than everybody. And then there's another component that says that I'm a burden to everyone around me. Right. I feel like a burden. I can like, and the opposite side is just kind of like what you said, man. I can't do nothing to change my situation or change the plight of my loved ones around me. And I'm just a burden to them. Right. Like, and if I have problems, that just adds to the burden. Right. So you have that thwarted belongingness. Then you also have that perceived, feeling that you're burdened. Right. You're burdened, and then thwarted belonging. So, and then the third one is that, they propose that, there's some way that you get to a place of saying that there's acceptability for suicide, right? And they're saying it's the acquired capability of suicide. So, we see like suicidality and things like that, they can run through families because it's something that has happened. It's seen as a viable option, right? And then, throughout the body, you see that. And then you also see if you've experienced a lot of trauma, right? Especially violence. And so if you think about those type of things, that runs a lot in our veteran community, right? Because now they have the means, they have the capability, and then they feel like they're a burden on society, where once they were the ones that were defenders of society. And then you have the ones where they don't feel like they belong to anyone. There's no longer a unit. There's no longer a group that they belong to. So, man, I have all those things together. Man, forget it, and now I have the capability to say this is a viable option for me, so it's like one of those storms that brew,
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So the other part of it that I want to speak about, before we wrap it up, is the support, right? What does that support look like? Whether it be a spouse or close friend or family member or community or professional. I just want to speak to the support when dealing with not only suicide, but what we talked about earlier with generational trauma. And so before I have your response, the story that I wanted to share to go back with the generational trauma, I have a couple of friends and they have interracial relationships, right? Yeah. And so they're African American. They know they were told those stories, and now they see them and they feel all of that heaviness that weighs in on their heart. And their counterpart, who was never shared those stories or told, growing up, but see it, don't really relate. And so some try to show the support, and then some just don't connect with it at all. And so, I just wanted you to talk through the support aspect of helping someone.
Yeah, man. Wow. Yeah. So that's deep, man. I don't think we can really touch it too much, but I can, let me just give my thoughts on it. Right. We sometimes think that, when we think about the race issue, because you know it, right? We heard all those type of things, man. Like, hey, you better not go out there and get a white woman. All those type of things that we heard within our community, right? Especially if you go out there, you make something of yourself, whatever, right? Oh, you're gonna go that way or this way, right? And it's not really about it's never about that, but that's what we've heard. So and I tell people, man, that I'm working with or in our community that, man, we have to kind of flip that upside down, right? The ability or the fact that you're actually married to someone from a different culture, you have an advantage too, and then you're also working the problem that we're all trying to solve, right? Your representation of your family in your family is a solution to what we're dealing with, right? You have to divide, because if you think about, there'll be interracial kids, right? That'll happen. They'll have to understand the nuances of color versus, maybe privilege and other things. But within that marriage, man, you already have a way to say, how can we live peacefully together, loving together, all those type of things, right? And we sometimes feel like, no, I gotta shun that. But that's like kind of what we were working for. Like, what I'm saying? Like, if we kind of go back to the idea, man, because that was absolutely allowed. People were lynched. They were killed, right, for looking, right? And now, we've kind of progressed to a place where, hey, man, I'd say, man, that's good, right? Like, where sometimes we think in the past, because we've been taught that way, but now it's like looking at it, man, from a true vantage point. You have a strength that other people maybe in your community that don't have it, right? As long as you can talk through it. But that's just the one piece. But being able to have those honest conversations, man, we have to have them. Even my wife is from Zambia, so she has a different culture than I have, even though we both Black, our skin color is the same way, but we have different cultures, right? Her experience is different than mine, right?
Yep.
And, discrimination history and all those type of things are the things that she had to deal with. But it's being able to have open conversations first within the house before you ever would go take it outside to either family, right? It's kind of talking, hey, this is my experience. You may have a different experience, but this is kind of where I've been. And these are the things that could happen, right? To me and have happened to me. And there's an identification and an awareness, but that compassion has to be within the marriage. And the marriage should be perfect for that, right? Like, where there's natural compassion and awareness and care from one to another. But as you mentioned, how do we start that conversation? Man, we look for community that understand it, right? There has some understanding and they have some specialty in it, right? So, we have in our communities like the NAACP, we have other organizations, Urban League, other things that kind of come together and say, hey, these are the things that we're all experiencing. Let's talk about it. Groups, different things like that. At my center, we have a PTSD group, right? Where, and this is a couples group where husband and wife are coming together, spouses are coming together, and then we're dealing with first talking about it. How, because most of the time we don't talk about it and within our spouses, right? We, even as a counselor, man, it took me years to tell her, everything that I experienced at war, right? Like, hey, you don't need to hear that. You don't need to worry about it. But if we don't talk about some of those experiences, then there's a hidden thing and hidden trauma that they will always be tripping over. It will trigger you, and then they don't have any clue. And they're supposed to be our closest ally, right? So it's important to talk about it. So having somebody that can help facilitate those conversations and don't let the partner be overwhelmed, reliving the experience, all those type of things that kind of sometimes happen with trauma. So having a clinician that's aware of it. So looking for groups, VA has some groups. I work with as a consultant with the Warrior Research Institute. They had a project from the state of Texas Veterans Commission where they're providing telemental health to veterans and veteran family members, and it's regardless of their status of when they got out, what type of discharge they got. So, we're trying to open these different things up, right? And, within our center, we're trying to do the same thing. So having community to do that, then making sure, like, another part of my work is I do peer support training and awareness training to companies. So peer support, like, we're creating that in the Belton Police Department, but other organizations, we train people how to have, the basic skills of mental health first aid, right? That type of things, making sure, how do you listen? How do you reflect? How do you summarize? How do you give empathy? How do you give compassion? All those type of things in trained ways, and give them first line. They're like the first line of defense to send them to someone that's a clinical provider or the next step for medication, whatever it is. So providing that, man, where we're training one another, other companies, other organizations to respond to the needs of our veterans and to those that are experiencing the trauma, right? Because everyone can't get to a counselor. Sometimes it's cost inhibitive. There's other things that kind of lead to a time focus like that, but they can talk to someone on their job about, this is what I'm experiencing, right? That's kind of been, in that paraprofessional realm that has been trained, and they work closely with people like us, that are trained in the clinical mental health. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And so, when you were talking about the communities and you were talking about, mental health experts and how they help, you touched on the point of cultural sensitive therapy, right? And so, that's one of the biggest missions that I'm pushing, with Guards Down and the whole nonprofit and thing. So speak on cultural sensitive therapy.
Yeah. So, it's definitely needed, man. Right. Where, I sometimes look at, you can look at social media and other places, and you can see where people are tone deaf, right? They're not responding to what's going on. They're looking at it from one vantage point. They're not, So our current situation, we can see it, right? Like where people are not responding. They're one focus. They're not worried about listening. They can't identify with the nuances of people's cultures, right? So we see it. So it's like there's two ships just missing each other because we can't get on the same page. So what cultural sensitive therapy and other things do is allow us, one, to be informed on what that culture looks like. How do they respond? What are some of the norms and things that you may come up against? And this is not to generalize it, right? Because we can also have that side of, well, you're prejudging. No, it's not a prejudging. It's some things that you need to be aware of, right? Like, some people, like if we talk about the moral injury, people that aren't aware of like the military culture and all those type of things, they would ask you the question, well, why didn't you stop that? Right? Why didn't you stop that? Like, why didn't you stop that from happening, or this, or why didn't you stop that thing to come in? And sometimes you say, well, that's in the midst of our culture, or this person outranked me, or whatever it was, like all the different myriad of reasons, right, that we can apply to it. And it's the same thing within police culture and other warrior cultures, right, that come up. And if you're not aware of that structure, and then also how to bring in that greater human good and humanity, right? And bring in those and make sure they can be meshed, even through the lens of culture, the lens of the norms and different things like that is so important, man. Like if you have someone that's tone deaf as a clinician, you're not going to get to the heart of the issue.
Yeah. I thought you was about to say tone deaf as a leader.
Nah, I ain't even dealing with that today, man. Yeah. I know, man.
No, but no, I definitely agree with you. No, man, this has been great. This has been real. Any last words of encouragement or final thoughts that you want to say or share?
Yeah, man. And I think one of the big things that I've been thinking about, just us as African Americans, man, like, there's some reasons why we sing the Negro spirituals, like we shall overcome, man. Because even in the midst of everything that we've seen and do, we have a spirit that is unbroken, that can't be broken, right? It's been hindered a little bit, right, through apathy and the things that we've seen, right? The disenfranchisement with America and other things that we may have experienced. But it's the strength, man. I went to, last year, I did a trip to Ghana, right? And Ghana has one of the places that, slave castles. Man, to think about how they were put into the dungeons, how they were, in the slave trade, how they were put in the dungeons for months, right? Lying in their own, and, feces and things like that. And them having to experience that's prior to them ever getting on the ship to go across the middle voyage, right? And that they remained unbroken, right? We came and we built America, right? We helped build this nation. We helped do these different things across the world, man. And I remember I remember weeping, but I remember having it all, man, that I would tell all African Americans, man, we are stronger than you can ever imagine, dude. Man, that like broke my spirit, man, when I was there. Like, man, I think that I would have probably like, man, nah, man, you can just take me out right now, right? Or I'm gonna lay here and die. But we had thousands, hundreds of thousands that had the strength and the fortitude to say, I can get to this and I will find freedom. Right, man, and that's the thing that I would share to every young African American, male, female. Man, we have a spirit that won't be broken. We can overcome. It's going to take fights. It takes what we're doing now, man. But like, if you could ever, and I think we as African American people and others in lower social economic status, man, it's important that we travel, right? Like, me seeing that in Ghana, man, connected the story for me too. Right? Like, I went to Zambia with my wife before we got married and kind of saw a nation, right? But it's, you see it and you're like, man, there's nothing that I can't do, right? And it's not that I won't ever give myself an excuse, but man, we can do it. I can be, we won't be broken. So, the other thing as a clinician is that there are people out here that can help, it's not a sign of weakness. I've been to a counselor. I worked with a counselor, all those type of things, even as a counselor, that's important. that I stay, good and ready to provide the best help. So, being able, even in communities of faith, right? That's important too, right? Because when we leave religious areas or groups, we're no longer tending to our spiritual need, right? And we think, where does our morals come from? We think it just comes from our emotions or what we're taught. It's actually out of the spiritual area, right? So we have to tend to it, so we're not bankrupt, right? Morally bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt. So, know that there's people out there, clinicians. Y'all can always contact me, all those type of things, man. Contact you to have someone that can hear and is not tone deaf and can actually relate.
Give us your info. Put it out there so we know.
All right, so yeah, you guys can reach me at Insight Counseling Center. Website is www.insight-cc as in Charlie.org. You can also contact the number there, which is 254-307-2495. And we can work with you, work with your company too, to work through the different things, man. We do something there. It's called Business Direct. And we work with companies that, especially for leaders that have that presence of mind and that desire to know that they're also responsible for part of the mental wellness and emotional wellness of people that work with them. Yeah, we have, like the employee assistance programs and other things like that, but I'm offering you a little something different. How it applies to your culture, to not only to your culture, but also to your industry, and then tying it together with how can we help you as a team build and make sure your people are healthy and motivated and being, well, that well-being side. So yeah, reach out. We're available, man. Love the discussion. Greg, I appreciate the opportunity, man. But, I really enjoy it. I think about the things, man, where, we think back up to Mikey Stadium and stuff like that, man. Some of the things that we used to do on the football field and just hang out and talk about, man. And you think about like those relationships now are the relationships that now have to help change a culture. Right, change the things that we see, and that how a game of football, man, can be relayed back to saying, man, this is important about life, right? You learn different things because the football team, any sports team, is all types of races, different thoughts, but you got to come together to complete a mission. So I think it's important, man. We had that competitive side, but also, man, that loving and human side. So I appreciate the work you're doing, man. Keep up the good work. I love it.
Indeed. Well, y'all, this is Alton. Hey, man, I thank you so much for coming on and sharing, your words of wisdom and all of these resources. I hope this helps someone out there. And to all of the listeners, this is Al and Greg with Guards Down saying, stay focused, stay engaged, and stay safe out there.
That's what it's really all about. Giving yourself a fighting chance to just show what you got.